with the Thunderbirds, the U.S. Air Force demonstration team. So Rob, if you want to come on up. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Travis, thank you very much. And to the group, thank you for being such gracious hosts and inviting another Georgia pilot to come be with you today. I've tried to come down before, but for whatever reason, the work schedule or the family schedule just didn't work out, and so it's a real pleasure to be with you today. We had Governor Deal up in Rome this morning. I fly a little bit with Tiger Flight Foundation on the side, which you may have seen our planes around the state often. They're painted like Tony the Tiger, these little air coupes. And they were having something up there, so our Congressman Tom Graves and Governor Deal were up there in Rome this morning, and I said, I need to go be with some more important people. And so it's a real pleasure to be with you all today, and I'm very thankful for the invitation. This little talk that I have been fortunate enough to come up with and have been invited to do on a few occasions is one that I kind of put together from my Air Force experience, my experience with the Thunderbirds and the chance to fly with them during the time that I was involved with that squadron. And I've been out of that squadron itself for about 10 years. I was in 07 and 08 time frame, and I retired a few years ago from active duty and was able to keep flying airplanes for a living. But it's really great to be around other aviators, because no matter what age you are, no matter what generation you are, you can look in someone's eyes and you know that they're an aviator and that they have a love for planes and for flying and for the family that goes along with that. And so no matter where your background is, if you love airplanes, I'm in your family and you're in my family. And so that's a real special connection. And so you've got a warm place up in Rome if you ever make it up there to be there with us. Travis is going to be my little slide flipper here, and we'll just get as far as we get. I'll watch the clock, and I'll make sure we don't go too long, because I'm just as guilty of talking too long. If you're talking about airplanes, I don't know what it is. Pilots and bars, we talk about pretty girls, and we get in bars and we talk about airplanes. So I think there's something mixed up about that around meals and stuff. So, the other really neat thing about aviation and flying airplanes, regardless of what generation you come from, is it teaches a lot about who you are as a person, about your character traits, about your mentality, about having a service attitude and putting others first and serving them. About teamwork. I really loved the comment about how the 8th Air Force was the greatest teamwork endeavor of all time. In just about every operation from World War II, whether you look at Market Garden, you look at the attacks from Africa into southern Italy, you look at others around the north, you look at attacks and campaign plans from the Pacific. It was an amazing building of a team and the execution of a teamwork. And even now, you'd be amazed, and this will give you a little bit of confidence in the generations to come along. Just this morning up in Rome, we had a group of 20 teenagers from Sequoia High School up in Canton that are in their junior ROTC program there at Canton. We had them actually design, develop, and brief our morning mass briefing for our flying program up there. And these are 14, 15, 16-year-old kids that are learning teamwork, service, discipline, attention to detail. And so in this generation where there's a lot of entitlement going around, there's a lot of good youth and a lot of good youngsters that are doing a lot of great things. And so it was a real pleasure and a real honor to see them do that. And lastly, you look at an airplane and you're inspired. There's nothing that's not magical about seeing an airplane fly, no matter what kind of an airplane it is. We were just talking with our table about Oshkosh and big, little, gliders, the largest seaplane in the world that was up at Oshkosh this last couple of weeks. It's a phenomenal thing that these Bernoulli brothers came up with, hundreds of years ago, and that we get to enjoy the benefit of that today. And so that's what we'll talk about. We'll go for a few minutes. If you've got questions along the way, yell stop, I'll get to it, and we'll open it up for a few at the end. All right? That's a pretty cool picture. We were just talking, the Thunderbirds exist as part of the Air Force, and a lot of this came into being unfortunately, after the careers of many in this room. And so the teamwork that you all displayed in the operations and in the units and squadrons that you were in, that exists all the way till today. Having been in countless squadrons across my time in the service, I can tell you without a doubt that the camaraderie, the family, the kinship, the service, the attention to detail, that above anything else, regardless of the performance level of your aircraft or the capability of your unit, those kind of things are still going on in the service even today. And so you can take pride in knowing that you laid an incredible place of foundation for those of us who followed you in your footsteps. This is me right here. This picture was taken back out at Nellis a couple years ago. You can tell there's number 8 over here. He's got the 2 little travel pods. Everybody always put their overnight bags in his airplane, so he got to be the mule, you know, like in the Grand Canyon as you're hauling all the stuff down in there. He got to haul everybody's top kit and shaving kit and overnight stuff around. So it's a really great picture, and it was really good fun taking those. All right, for decades, we never had a service memorial. We never had a service monument in Washington. The Navy, the Marines, they've had the Iwo Jima Memorial. The Army has memorials all over the place. But for decades, the Air Force and the Air Corps never had a memorial. And so this plan was concocted by the Perot's, by Ross Perot Jr. He was the chairman of the foundation that raised millions and millions of dollars to create the Air Force Memorial. And when I was coming onto the Thunderbirds back in 2006, my very first trip that I went on as I was beginning to learn my duties with the squadron was to go to Washington, and we dedicated this memorial. And for those of you who've been there and seen it, you know where it resides. It's right on the southwest corner of Arlington. And so it's very appropriate that it's there because it really gets to look over a very special, hallowed piece of property and real estate. And having been there many times, most likely yourselves, but for me to go there and to see names on headstones like Vandenberg and Eaker and Creech and Towers and other names like that, and then to get to walk around other parts of Arlington where there's names like thousands who have been lost in the recent conflicts, then it's a very special place. So this memorial, and you'll notice that the memorial looks just like the bomb burst, which was all about honoring those who have gone before us. And so we got a chance to go dedicate this memorial, and I wasn't flying in this one. I was down on the ground, but keep going there, Travis. This is a really interesting picture because here's President Bush, this is Secretary Rumsfeld, and then there's Ross Perot Jr., and here's us out here. So they're having a good conversation. But we asked the president about this later on in the year when we had a chance to interact with him at the Air Force Academy graduation. And we showed him this picture, and he said he really didn't want to be involved in that conversation. He was more interested in looking at the airplanes that were flying. And so you can't tell it, but he's got just a little bit of a grin on his face when he saw this pass come by. So this is really great. We got to shut down Reagan Airport for at least a couple hours. And for those of you who have flown in the National Capital area, you know, you can't go inside of Papa 56. I mean, it's forbidden. I mean, you just don't do it. And so we got to fly inside of it for just a smidgen of time to get in there and do this flyby. Keep going there, Trav. There's another image. Here's where the ground was, and then if you keep going just about another second or two to the right, or to your left and my right, that's where Arlington starts. So that gives you a little perspective of where that was. All right, keep pressing. Character. This is part of this slideshow that I give. I don't need to talk to you all about character, but it gives you a little bit of reinforcement of what we're talking to youngsters about. So the sum of all traits that form the nature of people. The Thunderbirds really looked to emulate that. Above all else, we really looked at character. And when I was a squadron commander later on, and when I'd been an operations officer in other squadrons, I really focused on character traits a lot, even more so than performance. I always thought, and many of you probably thought the same thing too, that if you had a unit and maybe everybody's performance wasn't up to speed, you could probably work on the performance, but you couldn't fix bad character. And so I really tried to focus on character traits and personality a lot, and then the other stuff would typically work itself out, because guys would work longer hours. Not that I was trying to keep them away from anything, but they'd put in more effort, work smarter, and not necessarily harder and longer. All right, press on. Oh, back up one. This was the thing. I never told him where I got this quote right here. It's better to have a good name than great wealth. Most of us know that comes from Proverbs, but I never told anybody that's where it came from. And so everybody really bought into that a lot. So I always thought that telling folks that went a long way for me. Anybody a Boy Scout? Anybody seen those words before? Yeah, I was a Boy Scout too. When I went for my academy interview, Senator Sam Nunn, the only thing he ever asked me was, he asked me two questions. He said, "Are you a Boy Scout?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Were you an Eagle Scout?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "No more questions." And so I can't say enough that institution has provided a lot of great Americans along the way. Secretary Gates is currently the current national president of the Scouts, and so that for me was a big part of developing who I was along with my family. All right, press on. All right, this is a really interesting picture here, right here. This was the 60th birthday of the service. All of you know we came into the being as a service post-World War II, following all the great work that all the numbered air forces did in World War II, and then but the 60th was a real special year because the Navy for years has been having these things called Fleet Weeks. We hear about them all the time. Fleet Week in San Francisco, Fleet Week in New York, blah, 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 blah. Well, the Air Force decided this was the first year we were going to establish these things called Air Force Weeks. It didn't really sound all that, enticing, but they figured we'll put the Thunderbirds in 7 or 8 cities around the U.S. and see if we can't gin up something that will rival Fleet Week. Well, it just didn't happen, but we had a good time doing it. And this was a really neat picture that we took there inside of P-56. We're clearly inside of the prohibited area. But the thing I like about this picture is that the boss, if you can tell here real closely, he's not looking forward. He's looking to the right to make sure we don't hit the monument. After it was over with, we were talking to the photo chase guys, and the only thing that they were thinking was, don't hit the Capitol and don't hit the Washington Monument, because we were lower than the top of the monument. It's hard to tell from this image, but we were pretty darn low to get it to work right. So it worked out, but it's a really great picture of something that we'd never get a chance to take a picture of otherwise. So that was that. Another great shot there. That's me right down here on the bottom. And for those of you who fly formation or ever flew formation, you never want to be the low man on the inside of a turn, because the weeds are a little bit close down here, and it's not the most comfortable place to be at. So, and you're slower than everybody else too. You're only a few knots slower, but there's just something always a little uncomfortable about flying as the low man on the inside of a turn. The other interesting thing about this image is, for those of you who may have flown in the New York area or visited New York City, hopefully you've had a chance to go visit the 9/11 Memorial area. It's a really, really special place. But there's helicopters moving all across New York. I mean, business travelers, people moving from point A to point B. It's almost like they're a very expensive taxi service. And the interesting thing about this is we were listening to the helicopters on the radio. They actually, instead of landing, they all climbed to a higher altitude from what we were and just hovered and waited for us to get out of the way. So that lets you know how low we were kind of flying in order to try to get this image for that. Again, the big picture here, don't hit the big steeple here. Don't hit the Washington Monument. That's that one. All right, keep going. Okay, can anybody ID this very special woman that we're in the picture with? Yeah, it's Miss Maggie Thatcher. We had a real interesting chance to interact with her over at RAF Fairford for the big air tattoo show, which is as much of an industry show as much it is new airplanes and new technology. And many of you probably landed at Fairford or close there too at some point in your careers. I'm willing to bet you've been within probably a 10-mile radius of Fairford somewhere in the UK. But the next image, if you can tell from there's Sam. I saw Sam Weeks last week. Samantha is now, she's a full colonel, and she is the first female adversary tactics group commander at Nellis Air Force Base, working for the very first female general officer fighter pilot. There have been female generals all along, but General Jenny Flynn is now the commanding general of the U.S. Air Force Primary Tactics Weapons Base, Nellis. Can you believe that? Where we've come from. You know, it's a real amazing thing to see these gals who are great warriors, great pilots, great moms, and they have done a really amazing thing. They've really begun to do some great things. And so Samantha and I are still good friends to this day. On her right is Ed Casey. Ed is the operations officer for the guard unit down in Montgomery, and he flies for Delta also. But what's interesting about this picture of getting to interact with Mrs. Thatcher is on our uniforms here it says your position. So there's my name, but two people up, there was our right wing and our left wing, which to us in aviation just means which side of the formation you fly on. Well, according to British politics, right wing and left wing mean some very different things. And so as she was kind of going through this receiving line, she paused just for a moment while talking to Chris and Nicole. Nicole was our first female Thunderbird pilot. She was the right wing. And she looked at Chris's name tag and it said left wing. And she looked at Nicole's name tag and it said right wing. And she went, I like you much better. And so we thought that was a really interesting little story of getting to interact with her. And there's Tad. Tad's a full colonel now. He's working over in Europe. And Dan, he's a doctor. Dan was our flight surgeon. He's a ER doctor by background, and he would moonlight down at the downtown hospitals in Las Vegas. And he would tell us all kinds of stories about gunshot wounds and people getting beat up. And so he always had better stories than the pilots. We'd always want to hear his stories. All right. There's President Bush. We got a chance to interact with him. And go on to the next picture there. This is a really interesting story about getting to meet the president. You know, he flew fighters. He had flown in the Texas Guard, the Alabama Guard, and a couple other units, this and that and the other. And in getting to meet him, he was just as down to earth as sitting at the table with you guys this afternoon. We had breakfast with him, and then at the end of this time, we'd taken dozens of runs of pictures. We'd given him a lithograph and this and that and the other. And he steps out and he turns around and he looks at the whole group, all of us, all the pilots, our public affairs, our administration, our maintenance officer, our doc, and in that deep Texas accent that he has, he goes, "Well, you guys are cool." And so just the most powerful man in the world, and here he is spending half an hour just interacting with a few of us to make us feel good about serving our country. And so I always thought that was a really neat special opportunity to get to interact with him, and just for a few minutes. These are the gloves that I got to fly with, and having grown up in a deeply Bible-based home and having faith be a very big part of who I was growing up, we got to design these gloves. The guys now don't get to fly with these leather gloves, and so it's real special to get to hang on to these. And for those you might not be able to see it, but there's a Bible verse on this thumb right here. And for those of you who've ever dropped a weapon in anger, which many of you have, and haven't got to do that also, that's the digit, that's your finger that actually gets to release the weapons. And so I thought long and hard about what I wanted to do on that particular part of it. I got my kids' names on other ones and this and that and the other. But that Bible verse right there says, You have trained my hands for battle and my heart for war. And it was a Psalm of David talking about his relationship and his faith and how it meant to him. And so, there's no atheists in a foxhole. And so I thought that was a really important part of who I was. And there's no doubt that there were a lot of prayers that got said on the flight from England across the channel and into various parts of the Third Reich during many, many missions that you all went on. And so I can't emphasize that enough. And you don't get to say it in the same tone these days while you're out there in the service, but it goes without saying that that's a big part, I think, of what makes up all of us. All right, Travis, keep going. Keep going. This is a real interesting picture. You can't see where it was taken over, but many of you know the horrible news that happened earlier this summer with the Thunderbird that crashed in Colorado Springs, and then the Blue Angel that crashed up in Tennessee. And the last previous accident to that where a demonstration pilot had been lost was in 2007 in Beaufort, South Carolina. It was a guy named Davis, Kojak Davis. And we were in Louisiana at Barksdale, which has a big part of 8th Air Force history. And when this happened, and so this image was taken over NAS Pensacola, where the Blue Angels are based at, and we were going to do an air show close by, and so we got a chance to just honor Kevin in that flyby and honor him that day. All right, keep going, Trav. You can't like fast airplanes and big loud engines and not go to NASCAR. I mean, come on, who are we kidding? So we got to do a lot of flybys at races, that says it all. That's America right there. You know, God, country, apple pie, Atlanta Braves baseball, fighter jets, and NASCAR. I mean, what more is there? You know, I mean, come on. This is a real special part of what we got to do. Every show that we went on as part of the unit, we wanted to do a very special dedicated time with less fortunate families, Make-A-Wish families, kids. This child right here, unfortunately, was terminally ill, and this was down in Daytona Beach at a clinic called, instead of pediatrics, it was called Speediatrics, for being close to the racetrack. You can see all the checkered flags up there, but just getting to interact with these kids, it was a real special, and their families, was a very, very special part of what we got to do. Teamwork says it all right there. Give to something bigger than yourself. Without a doubt, everyone in this room has done that. And that's, as I take this talk around to school groups and other groups that'll hear it, that's probably one of the biggest things that I like to focus on with youth is giving to something that's bigger than yourself. A lot of folks and a lot of kids these days can't see past the screen, you know, that's right in front of their face. I call my kids screenagers, not teenagers. And so the ability to get them to look out into the world, into something that's bigger than who they are is a very big deal to me. Keep going there, Trav. Really great picture here. Talk about teamwork. This was up in Quebec City for, you know, we have cities here in America that are a couple hundred years old. Well, the cities are older than that, but Quebec was on its 400th birthday, 400 years old. That's a lot of age. And so we had a chance to fly with Snowbird 1. The Reds came over from the UK, us and the Blues were all together. Real good image of teamwork and working together. Any questions as we're going along, by the way? Yes, no, maybe, perhaps. Again, this picture here captures every squadron, not every AFSC, but every job specialty in the Air Force. And everybody that was here was part of this, was on this team, was part of this picture. You know, the public may see, you know, the fancy jets and the pilots, but what they don't see, flip one more slide, Travis. I think, no, keep going. This picture really means a lot to me, and it probably means a lot to you also, because this image right here is one of the jets in for a periodic maintenance check. And every once in a while, when you had time, you'd go out there and turn wrenches with these guys. Usually they would say, don't touch that. But generally, I'd go out there and I'd try to do a couple hours, you know, with them talking me through, okay, turn this one exactly this amount. Don't put too much torque on it. Don't touch that thing. And but But I literally placed my hands and my life in the hands of these guys every time I went flying. And you all did the very same thing with for those of you that turn wrenches and for those of you that got to fly the planes. It's a big deal to have a very good, positive relationship with those that we serve and worked for. I always like to turn organization charts in my units and turn them upside down and say, look, you guys are the ones doing the real work. I work for you and try to get you what you need to do your job right. And then we'll go from there. Air Force Academy graduation, that's a big deal every year. It's a real special time for students and new cadets that are coming into the service. This is kind of the last shot here. This image is one that can relate to this group because you've lost many of your comrades, your colleagues, your friends. I remember the first time I lost a really good friend that I knew. I knew his family. I knew his children. And he went out to go flying one day and he didn't come back. And it was a big deal. And this group of guys right here, this was one of the last images that was taken of them before all four of these airplanes crashed together at exactly the same time in exactly the same piece of sky and ground, because they were following what their leader was doing, and their leader couldn't get them out of that situation in that particular instance. And so as we honor those who have gone before and remember them, we honor them by continuing to live on and honoring their character, honoring who they are as people, and recognizing them. And so we'll finish with that slide. That's as good a place as any as I can think in a setting, in a group like this. Let me personally say thank you. I hope I got a chance to speak to all of you that I've not had a chance to meet before. But the legacy and the legend that you are, and I say that absolutely 100% sincerely, the legend that you are is that of a living legend, and you are honored, you are recognized amongst those who have followed in your footsteps, and we have not done it as well as we can, but we've tried our best. And so I say thank you to those of you who flew in the 8th during World War II, and hopefully we can live up to that in the future. I've got a little memento to present to you, and this is something, I don't know if the offices that you have, you can place this or put it somewhere, but this is one of the images from the slideshow of us flying over the Washington Monument with the White House in the background to the 8th Air Force Heritage Society, Georgia chapter. On behalf of the Thunderbirds, we'd like to say thank you very much. So thanks for having me today, and it's been an honor.
Excellent presentation. Makes me want to re-enlist.
All right.
The recruiters will be outside.
Any questions? We typically have somebody that has questions. Any questions for Rob? Mark?
When you're doing these shows, how many do you typically do in a given period of time?
Yeah, the question was how many shows do we do a year? And we would typically travel to 35, that's plus or minus a show or two, but about 35 weeks a year. And then there's usually 2 days of shows on each weekend, so that's 70. Plus there's a practice day, so that's another 30, so that's 110. And then we'd practice once a day while we were back home, so that's another 30. And then during training season we'd fly 2, sometimes 3 times a day. So 35 weeks, you might as well be deployed somewhere. You might as well go somewhere for 6 months and be gone. And so about 70 air shows, about 110 performances in front of people, about another 30, so about 150 of those, and then twice a day during training season. So it's a lot of repetition, and that's how you get good at it. You hear stories from astronaut crews and other crew airplanes where you can tell what's going on by the sound and the intonation of your voice. You could probably hear somebody on your intercom and your interphone and remember that and know they're about to be in a world of hurt. And you could begin to hear that over the amount of time that you spent getting to know these guys and gals that you worked with and flew with. So, yes, sir.
The F-16 is your aircraft that you're currently flying with the Thunderbirds.
It still is, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The question I have differences between the F-16 and those other aircraft?
Great question. If you didn't hear, the question was what planes had I flown other than the F-16, obviously, and then how would I kind of compare and contrast those. When I graduated from flight training in 91, so I don't want to age anybody here, 92, we didn't have any fighters. We were in the Gulf War drawdown, and I didn't want to go to a desk job, so I elected to go fly the C-130 for one assignment. And so I went out to Japan and flew the C-130 for one assignment. It's kind of like your first love. You never forget your first love. And I absolutely loved flying that airplane. Slow, ugly, loud, vibrating, these props. But we landed on dirt in the middle of Cambodia. We landed on ice up in the middle of Alaska. We went and dropped Christmas gifts to kids around all the Polynesian islands down in the South Pacific. We went to Hong Kong, Thailand, all over the South Pacific world. And so that's my first love. There's no doubt about it. But I found a prettier girl when I transitioned to the F-16. And I'm sorry? Oh, she's a pilot's dream. She really was. They got it right when they designed her. It's lasted a long time, and they keep adding things to it, and it's not making it that much harder. We've upgraded to the F-35 and the F-22, which are incredibly performing airplanes, and they perform a much higher skill level, not skill level, but a much higher in-game performance level. So all these newfangled planes that our tax dollars are going to, they're absolutely worth it, and I'm not biased about that. I really became a believer on that, having got to fight against them in some training scenarios. I finished flying the T-38, so I got to kind of bookend my career with the plane that I learned to fly in, instructing new pilots. And we've put new engines on that, we've put new intakes on that, we've put new avionics on it, and it is a wonderful trainer. And if we can get the airplane to last, the program for pilot training is a very good program. And so the ringers that we're running students through, we're getting a very good end result out of these new pilots that were graduating into the service. So, but I can't tell you enough good things about the F-16. She was good to me. I flew her a long time. I flew it single engine across the North Atlantic on multiple deployments. Single engine out across the Atlantic is a big deal. I just put a sticky over the oil pressure gauge, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's not like I can fix it. And I don't have another engine to help me out. And she was good to me. I only had one engine, even an anomaly, in almost 15 years of flying that airplane. And it would do what I wanted it to do, the avionics. Many of you flew planes that you flew, and you got to know that plane so well, you could talk to it, and you could really get it to do what you wanted it to do. I have no doubt about that. And I felt that same way about the F-16. So as much as I have a first love, I found a really good one after that. So I really enjoyed it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sir.
What about Delta?
Delta. Oh man. I hope nobody flew last week. Was anybody out there? Oh man, thank God. I was working last week, and so it was a pretty interesting week. And it's funny, everybody always remembers the worst thing that's going on right now. Southwest just had the same thing happen about 2 months ago. United had one 6 months ago. American had a computer meltdown a year ago. And so if anybody or your family members was out there, I apologize. I mean, we were just as frustrated as everyone was, and so it's understandable. But stick and rudder, I'm on the little 717, which is the remake of the DC-9. And so if you ever flew the DC-9, either in the service or for real, it's a good little stick and rudder plane. It's a fun plane to fly. I turn all the automation off quite a bit and hand fly it until I have to let the automation do it. And so I'll hand fly it up to about 25,000 feet, turn on the autopilot, it'll do its thing, and then I'll turn it off about 20,000 feet on the way down. And so it's a good platform. And the company really does have your interest in the traveling public in mind. I can say that definitively. They want to provide a very superior quality experience for you. And so I apologize for last week. It was all over the news.
You're the one that unplugged it.
I unplugged it. Yeah, I kicked the cord. Yeah, it was me. So.
I want to know what your aircraft will do for you in the cockpit.
Yeah, exactly. We do all the vills and the burgs and the boroughs, Greensboro, Charlottesville. So we've picked up a lot of the regional flying down here in the South. So yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know, here's the deal with that, Greg, and you've heard it as you've been around. It's all budget based. The year that I went, we happened to have the right amount, and the chief staff wanted to do an overseas tour. The administration wanted us to do an overseas tour. Right after we went to Poland, if you remember, Poland bought about 36 more F-16s, and so it was as much as us going and showing the flag and showing the airplane to the Polish people as much as it was other reasons that we went over there. 2 years after I went, they went back out to Asia. They went to Australia. They went all the way to Townsville, Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, Korea, Japan, Guam, which had not seen any Thunderbird shows in decades. And I think it's a very good deal, not just for the guys and gals on the squadron, but to go out there and project and show the colors and be out there, not just a combat unit. One of my assignments in the service was I was the exchange pilot with the Bahrainis, and we came back to the plant and delivered planes, but those planes that get delivered had no markings on them. So we landed out at this airport in lodges out in the middle of the Azores, no markings on these airplanes whatsoever, and not a person came up to and talked to us. But we landed at the same base a few years later in the Thunderbird planes, and the whole island turned out. And so it's a chance for real good goodwill, and I hope they do, but it's all based on that budget. So, yeah. Any others? Well, again, yes, ma'am.
When you're flying, by those big monuments and the Statue of Liberty, do you get to practice before you do that, or do you just...
Did you practice not hitting the mic?
Did we practice not hitting it? We would practice on the show sites specifically, and generally our photographer and the guys back here who are really smart photographers will tell you that they can, within a couple of miles and angles, know the right angle that they want to look for in the picture, in the image. And so they would prepare that, and they would try to prepare us a flight path. And if we had time and gas, the boss would usually get to go do it, because he's the only one that really matters. Because the others of us, we're just looking at a reference point on his plane. We're just there for the picture. He's the one that's got to put us in the right piece of sky. So he might get to go by there and kind of get an idea of what they wanted to do. But in general terms, it was just kind of a one take, to use a Hollywood term. It was one take, Maybe you'd get a second or third pass. But we tried to make it as good as we could the first time around.
Well, it looked pretty scary. And how is that going to get to be the boss? Because all of you are very skilled, I would say just as skilled. So what makes him the boss? Is he older or?
Usually. And a little crazier and a little bit wiser combined there. But that guy, there's a lot of general officers that have been Thunderbird 1 over the years. And so the amount of, how shall I say this? Politics is not the right word, but usually there was some general officer somewhere else. And those of you who've been around and know this, what I'm talking about, he's got his guy, his young guy somewhere that he wants to be Thunderbird 1. And he'll push for that guy and push for that guy and that sort of thing. And that's generally, you get your arm twisted into being Thunderbird 1 or Blue Angel 1 just a little bit. You don't really go into it with both feet until you're there. But the guys that I worked for, I was incredibly privileged to work under their tutelage. And they were great leaders and great pilots. One of them was such a good pilot. It was probably the best F-15 pilot in the world at one time. And so it's like if the fate of the free world relied on one dogfight, this is the guy you would want going out there to do it. And so they're very skilled, but they're very good leaders as well. Yes, ma'am. Any others? All right, Trav.
One more. As Thunderbird 7, every town these guys go to, there's some lucky civilian or celebrity or news guy that gets to go flying, and you were the guy that did most of that flying. Who were some of the fantastic top dogs and some of the less than fantastic top dogs that you got to fly with, Rob? Because we know you like talking about that.
Okay. The question, if you got the question there, you would get to fly people in the back seat a lot, and the worst, the absolute worst, because I remember it this long, was a little newspaper reporter from Davenport, Iowa. Is anybody from Davenport, Iowa? I hope I'm not insulting your town.
It's her grandson.
She screamed the entire time. As soon as we broke ground and I got the landing gear up, I had to turn the intercom volume down because she was screaming the entire time. I put the landing gear back down, I put full afterburner, I put the speed brakes out, and I burned the gas right over the airport, and we came back and landed. So we did not have any fun on that sortie. Two people that kind of are the tie that were the best flights. One for an ultimate reason, the other one just because it was outright fun. Was anybody a NASCAR fan? Yes, yeah, NASCAR. So the Busch brothers were from Las Vegas, Kurt and Kyle Busch, and they have a reputation for being a little bit of a wild card out there in NASCAR. And so NASCAR contacted us and said, would you give one of these two guys, whatever schedule works out, a ride? And so I got a chance to fly Kyle, the younger of the two brothers, who was not, he had not, this was 7-8 years ago, so he had not won the Cup, which he won, I guess, a year or two ago. And but his manager, when he came in, they were getting the briefing. He was nervous about this flight that he was going to go on. And if some of you will remember a funny comedy movie that came out a few years ago about Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby and the Ricky Bobby crowd. And so I asked his manager, I said, well, what is he like? What's going to lighten him up? What's going to get him loose for this flight? And he said, well, he really likes that movie that had just come out, this Talladega Nights. And so I walked into the room with Kyle Busch, NASCAR driver, he's a millionaire, and I just said, what's up, shake and bake? And he started laughing, and he got into it, and he went out and he had a blast. And I've still we traded numbers, and so I've been friends with Kyle to this day. And I went down the Daytona 500 earlier this year, and I got to sit down on his pit crew. And so that was a really great experience to kindle that friendship. The other person that I got to fly, some of you may know this name, some of you may not know this name, but when Disney, the board of directors at Disney let Eisner, who was the previous CEO of Disney, they let him go. They hired a gentleman who at the time was the president of ABC News, ABC Sports, and his name was Robert Iger. And Disney contacted us, and this guy wanted to fly. And so there's some laws and legal reasons about giving and taking and getting this and getting that, and we never addressed that, but suffice to say that over the years, Disney has given, and many of you, your sons, daughters, grandchildren, nieces, aunts, whatever, have been able to go to Disney at very deeply discounted tickets. And I just took my kids the last couple of years, and we paid probably 50%, both for our lodging, not just at the Shades of Green, but for our tickets to actually get into the parks. It's a big deal to take a family of 4 to Disney for a week. I mean, it's like a plan all year kind of thing. And America's military gets to do that for about half price. And so, again, with Mr. Iger, every time we go, I got his email, and every time I take my kids, I send him a little thank you note. And this guy is not just Disney like Anaheim or Disney Orlando. This is Disney, I mean, this is a big deal worldwide. Shanghai, Paris, all these places that they have. And the service that not just them, but many other industry things do for America's military is a big deal. And so that's one example of the other really great person that I got to give a flight to. And so a lot of people ask, why can't I get a flight? Why can't I get a flight? Why can't I get a flight? And That's the reason. Travis is still mad because he's never gotten a fight. And so that's the reason that the Thunderbirds get out there and get in, and the Blue Angels and the Golden Knights and the Canadian Snowbirds get out there and do it, is so this larger picture of things that can happen for the greater good of everyone. And so those are two really good ones that I'll leave you with.
Cool. Very good. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Travis.
Appreciate having you, man. Thank you.